Being emotionally intelligent can be challenging. Having a difficult conversation can be challenging. Being emotionally intelligent in a challenging conversation, that is a very hard ask. And that is exactly what we're going to talk about today. Today, I'm going to offer some tips on how to stay emotionally intelligent in those moments when you've been emotionally triggered, when they've been emotionally triggered, when both of you are emotionally triggered. I'm Bob Bordone. I'm a senior fellow at Harvard Law School. I'm the founder and former director of Harvard Law School's Negotiation and Mediation Clinical Program, and I'm the founder and principal of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute. Now, let me start by saying that for many of us, right, we could be very effective in a hard or challenging conversation. And if I asked you to think about what are the adjectives that describe you when you feel like you're being effective, you might say creative, good listener, calm, collected, rational. But then if I asked you to think about what are the adjectives that describe you when you have lost your emotional balance in a difficult conversation, I suspect you'll say things like closed, angry, distracted, maybe mean-spirited, unhinged. So what has happened here is we've gone from what I would say the green, the effective, to the red. How do we handle that? So the first thing I want to suggest is that before I go into any kind of difficult conversation, I want to do some preparation. And part of that preparation is really asking myself, what are the kinds of emotions that often or might come up for me in this conversation? In fact, I might even write them down. Then I want to think about what are the kinds of emotions that might come up for the other person and write them down. The purpose in doing this is not to not have those emotions come up. They are going to come up. But the more I am aware of that, the better prepared I am, the less knocked off balance once they do come up. Now, I want to divide my tips here on emotional intelligence into broadly two forms. One is, how do I handle my own emotions when they're in this hard conversation? And two, how do I handle their emotions? Because emotional intelligence is both about really being aware of yourself and what's going on for you, and being intelligent and intuitive about what is going on for them. So let's offer some tips, first of all, for handling your own emotions. First is really managing what we call the emotional refractory period. So what does that mean? So at the most basic of terms, the human mind operates at two levels. There's kind of this cognitive or conscious level that is making all sorts of decisions. For example, the reason why you are still watching this video and loving this video, I'm sure you're loving this video, make sure you like it at the end. The reason why you are doing that is a conscious decision. But if you are suddenly interrupted by someone says, "Hey, dummy brain," suddenly you might feel offended and angry. And that enacts the subconscious part of the brain, the automatic part of the brain that does a bunch of things that we're not consciously deciding. And an emotional refractory period is a moment when something happens to us in the conversation that we experience as an emotional trigger. And it causes a reaction that isn't conscious, but actually releases a bunch of physical chemicals, things like cortisol and adrenaline. And those chemicals actually override the cognitive or conscious part of the brain. And that period of overriding can last for 5 minutes or 20 minutes, but if the other side keeps on doing things that knock us off balance, it gets extended and extended. So, piece of advice one is, how do you handle the emotional refractory period? The first thing I want to say here sounds really simple, really hard to do. Do no harm. So I have a specific strategy for what that looks like. And for me, that is writing out an email of everything I want to say to them, but actually sending it to myself. The act of writing it out actually helps me handle that emotional refractory period. And the act of sending does something really nice to my brain. But what I'm not doing there in terms of harm is I'm not hitting reply to all, because reply to all is a real problem. The second important thing you want to do with respect to your own emotions is to really understand deeply not just what is that loud or cover emotion that you might be feeling, like aggravation or anger or fury, but also what are the other feelings that you're having? Maybe sadness, worry, vulnerability, concern, disappointment. Becoming aware, fully aware of those emotions actually helps us get more control of what we can do next. So Matt Lieberman, who teaches at UCLA, has done research on this dynamic, which is what he calls affective labeling. The act of naming the emotions actually helps us tame those emotions. The third thing we can do is then mindfully consider, would it be helpful to actually share those emotions? Look, somebody here has a lot of emotion. This is Rosie the dog, and she clearly wants some love. Hello, Rosie. One thing you could do is get a golden retriever, but not everybody could do that. But this is a very good way to handle your own emotional refractory period. So actually, there is research that sweet little animals actually help us deal with our emotions. And by the way, having sweet little animals in a negotiation like this can be incredibly helpful. I hope none of you will ever be in a situation where you need to hire me as a mediator. But if you do hire me as a mediator, and if we are doing it on Zoom, sometimes I purposely shut my camera off because you know what the profile picture is? It's a picture of Rosie the dog, and it almost always makes people smile. The next thing you want to think about is whether it's appropriate to share the emotions. And you don't always want to share those emotions in a difficult conversation, but frankly, there are times when it's a good idea. Because lots of times we may be fighting about X, Y, or Z, but what's really going on is that there's a lot of hurt feelings, a lot of confusion, vulnerability, and anger, and actually talking them through is the emotionally intelligent thing to do. Okay, so that's how to deal with your own feelings. Let's talk about, in that hard conversation, how do I deal with the strong emotions of the other side? First, and critically important, is active listening, and specifically seeking to acknowledge the emotion you're hearing. When I say acknowledge the emotion, I don't mean agree with it. I don't mean you have to affirm it. I mean you have to demonstrate to them that you have heard the emotion. And here's the reason why. Because in a really hard conversation, even if you have a good solution to their problem, if they're showing you a lot of emotion, they're probably not ready for that solution. They need to have that acknowledge emotion piece first. I will give you a real example. There have been times in my life when I have been overworked, really haggard, really exhausted, and I make a phone call to my mom, and I tell her about how exhausted I am and tired, and I haven't had a break. And she says something like, well, you need to tell more people no. Or you need to go on a vacation. And I'm enraged. I get super angry at her. Is this fair? No. Is it understandable? Absolutely. And it's not because her solution isn't a good one. It's a great one. I should say no. I should take a vacation. The problem is I'm not ready to hear that yet. What I first need to hear is something like, boy, you sound really tired. Or, gosh, that does sound exhausting. Once I hear that, now I can move to the problem solving. The other piece of advice I want to offer you is extremely challenging, but a real sign of emotional intelligence. Because oftentimes, when the other side is really emotional, they are not going to be skillful with you. They're not going to say something like, you know, Joanne, I'm feeling sad, angry, tired, and frustrated. The way their emotion is going to come at you is something like this. Joanne, you're an incompetent fool. Joanne, you're a disgrace to this organization. Joanne, I am so angry at you. And your job there is to hear that accusation or that attribution or that characterization as a hidden emotion and then translate it back to them as an emotion. So when they say something like, you are a disgrace to this organization, that is a hidden emotion. Your job is to translate that back in an emotionally intelligent way. And that sounds like something like this. Wow, you're really disappointed in me. The first time you do that, they might come at you more strongly. Disappointed? I can't believe we keep you on payroll. If they do that, of course what you want to do is defend. I do a great job. But that's what you have to stick in there. That's where emotional intelligence comes in. Where you say something like this. Wow, you actually feel really betrayed by what I did. Almost always, they'll calm down. Have you agreed that you betrayed them? No. All you've done is translated that accusation, that characterization, into the emotion that they're feeling in a way that calms them down. So, when you are going into a difficult conversation, doing the preparation work of having a sense of what kind of emotions does this conversation bring up for me? What might it bring up for them? How will I handle my own emotions here? And how can I really acknowledge their emotions? And when they're not good at expressing them, translate those attributions, those characterizations, those assaults back into emotions. And so those are the key tips for being emotionally intelligent in a difficult conversation. So now, if you want to continue to grow in intelligence, watch this next video, The Art of Persuasion for Professional Success. And one of the most intelligent things you could do right now is subscribe to my channel, like this video, and ring the bell. Okay, it's not difficult to keep watching. Click, click.